Hi. Oh my God. How are we doing today? So good to see you again. So good to be with you again on Grief to Grace. I am super excited to be with you this beautiful day. So, how are you doing? How are you today? How is everything going? I hope you're fine. I hope you've had all the fun today. You know, today is a very special day. Today we're talking about children's grief. And every time I come here, I talk about how children grieve. I tell you, do you know kids grieve? Children grieve. You don't have to stay back and believe they don't grieve or they don't know anything about grief. So today we have a specialist in the house who is going to share with us how children grieve and the different ways and different types. So I think it is something worth listening to, right? It is something we need to sit back, get our chair, get our coffee, get our tea, get our drinks, get our water, whichever one that resonates with you. Get those chocolates. Yeah, like me. Okay. Get everything that you need and bring your seat closer and listen to this very beautiful topic that we'll be talking about today. And this week we'll be having like resources, people talking to us about how we can manage our grief. And today's one is really so special because it is for those kiddos, our kids. How well do you want our society to be? Then we need to talk about the mental health of our children. So you're welcome today to Grief to Grace, and I am your host, Ruth Hephzibah. Grief to Grace is that podcast where we move from being stuck to being unstuck, transforming pain into purpose. So today, like I said from the beginning, we are diving into the world of childhood grief, and we have a very special guest in the house who has dedicated over 20 years of her life helping families and children to heal. Before I introduce my guest, I want to remind you of my book, A Pen That Rewrites Grief. Are you ready to be that pen that rewrites grief? You need to read this book. You need to take it because it's a guide in your lifetime. And I want to tell every one of you that have been you supporting, buying and supporting us. I just want to say thank you. So you need a 60-day guide because you need it for your journey. Everyone's journey is different. But you see this book, one book that can help you not just in your grief journey, but as you journey through life, you need it because it has a lot of interventions and activities that can take you through the journey. Even the days you don't want to walk, even the days you don't want to sit up, even the days you don't want to talk to people. Yes, it's all covered in this book. And you know what? We got another book cooking. Another book cooking. And this one, oh my gosh. You are not going to get it wrong. Just keep guessing what it is. Keep guessing what it is. And I tell you, you will love it. So, today's episode is full of those incredible nuggets from Dr. Athy's experience. And I tell you, she is going to help you and your kiddos in this grief journey. Are your children not having a fuel of purpose, God's purpose in their life? Are they not being able to achieve those things that you feel a child should achieve? Are they missing the way? There are just so much going on with kids these days. And so if you know you have any of this stuff, just know that that child may have something that you need to listen to in this episode today. And I want to introduce to you my guest, Dr. Annette Athy. I hope I got it right.
Athy. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Athy. Okay, so she is our guest today, and she is a grief specialist and a child development expert who has worked in the mental health field for over 2 decades. She is a coach, she is an author, and she is the creator of Grief Storm Quiz, a tool that helps parents understand their children's unique grief journey. And today she'll be sharing some of those stuff with us. So, Dr. Ite, we are so honored to have you here. And we want to thank you for being with us tonight. I want to say thank you for finding out time to join us in this episode. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Ruth, for having me here. And I love the title of your book, the
Thank you.
grief. That's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Because we are the only ones that can rewrite our grief.
Yeah,
So if you want to rewrite your grief, it starts from you. Healing begins with you. So if you want to heal or you're trying to heal, you don't need to look out there looking for where healing is when healing is within. So I learned about that, when I was grieving, and I tried everything I could and it didn't work. I was stuck in grief, and I was diagnosed of acute stress and just so much just going on. And I told myself, what do I need to do? And then these were the things I did. And before I knew it, really, I tell you, I took every day had its own intervention. And every day I picked up one intervention and I kept on using them. And it was like in a span of 1 year, but every day had a different intervention. But in 60 days, I was able to stand up and do things I couldn't do before. And I'm so grateful to God for what He did, for the healing He has taken me through, in this journey. And that's why I'm also presenting it to others, because there is no two ways about it. You are this pen that can rewrite your grief. So healing begins with you. Thank you
absolutely.
so much.
And that is definitely one of the key components that when I work with parents and families, is to empower them. Like, yes, I have a background and an expertise in this information, but I'm not the expert of you. You're the
Mhm.
expert of you. You're the
That's
expert of
it.
your family.
That's it.
And so, what I love to do is to step in and give families and parents just tools and guidance to help empower them so that they're working smarter, not harder. Like, I'm not about to give a parent 3 more hours of things to do and the belief that grief will be fine if you take three
No,
hours a day doing this. That's just not how grief works.
no, that's not how it works.
And again, we're such a grief illiterate society, and we aren't talking about that the 5 stages of grief were actually intended for patients who are dying on hospice, not for the grievers. And so,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we have parents who are guiding their kids believing that these 5 stages of grief, if we just check the boxes, then grief will go away and we'll be done with it.
Yeah.
And the reality is, grief is the payment for love.
Hmm.
these our loved ones that have died, grief is the price of that.
Wow.
We grieve them because we love them, because they meant
That's
something to us, because they deeply impacted us in some way, whether they were our caretaker or our child or a grandparent. They meant something to us. And that's why
wow.
we're grieving. And that grief just isn't going to magically go away. But there are things we can do that will lessen that daily pain that prevents us from getting out of bed in the morning.
Wow. That's true. Whoa. Thank you for sharing. So now, can you tell us who Dr. Athy is?
The, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Can you tell us more about yourself?
Oh, yes. So I have been a counselor for over 20 years in the mental health field, working with children and families. And 3 years ago, I just really felt called to really specializing in grief. I felt like it was an area that people weren't talking about. We had had a couple events in the school district that my kids are a part of where these grief situations came up, and the answer was to just shut it down and not talk about it. And that really fueled me to say, I need to do something about this. And about a year ago, I decided that grief really was my passion, and I decided to retire my counseling license and go full into the grief coaching and speaking, because I feel like people need to be talking about this and people need to hear. What kind of initially led me to this is I've had a lot of loss in my family. The most impactful one, well, I guess there's two of them. When I was 19, my aunt, who shared the same birthday with me, went in for a medical procedure and passed away after. And of course, I was devastated. It was the first big loss for me that was one of those that shouldn't have happened kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was heartbroken because, number one, we shared a birthday, so we had a bond. But also, she had 3 boys, and they were 12, 9, and 6. And the extended family came in to help the family. But the messages everybody kept giving the boys were, be strong for your dad. Be strong, essentially telling them you need to do this for your dad, like hold it in, don't cry, because then he'll cry. And because the grief was so strong and so heavy, suddenly they went into the house, they took down all pictures of her, they took out all her clothes, anything that was a reminder of her left that house, and she was never to be spoken again. Her name wasn't mentioned. And I knew at 19 that wasn't right. That wasn't okay. But at the same time, I was a kid. So what could I do about it? What could I say about it? And so the grief kind of followed me after that. And I helped in different grief groups and led different things, and led some children's groups and things like that. And I don't think I truly understood the depth of grief until my dad died 9 years ago. And when he died, he had just a real simple outpatient procedure, came home, was fine. We had dinner, and ended up dying from a pulmonary embolism later that evening. And so just overnight, my best friend was no longer there. And it left me in an entirely different situation than when I was 19. When I was 19, it was just me, and it was my grief, and I had counselors at college to talk to and friends. But 9 years ago, when my dad died, I now was not only attending my grief, I was having to attend my 4 kids. And my dad's husband and my own husband, and I was the one who had to step forward and essentially attend to his business of dying. You know, when you die, there's all that business stuff that has to be handled, the funeral arrangements, the obituary, the shutting down credit cards, the financial stuff, you know, that business part that we don't really talk about. But there's a lot of that. And so I went into business mode, but I was very aware I was barely functioning. My kids were really struggling because this was somebody they spent a lot of time with. And it was just so out of the blue. My youngest was 2.5. And so every day she would wake up looking for him, asking for him. She didn't understand. So I had to be this kind of parrot, the broken record who says every day, you know, he died, his heart stopped, which sounds in adult language very cruel or very harsh. But her being 2.5, she needed me to speak very concrete, real terms. She needed those facts. And because at 2.5, obviously she doesn't understand the permanency of death. She doesn't understand what that means. And so I just had to keep saying on repeat. And most of the other adults in our world, as soon as she would ask, they would break down in tears and kind of exit the room. They didn't know how to handle it. So every time I was stepping in and having to say, and I think there are points of that made it easier for my grief, because I could just set mine on a shelf and do the caretaking and attend to them. And yet at the same time, as you know, grief waits for you. So even if I wasn't attending to it and I was just putting it on the shelf, it was just hanging out, looming in the background. And until I could figure out a way to parent them through grief and deal with my own, there was a lot happening. I wasn't the parent that I wanted to be. Everybody used to say, "Oh, Annette has so much patience with her kids. She never yells at them. You know, how does she do that?" And after my dad died, I was highly irritable. I was screaming at my kids. If they were yelling or fighting, it would just be like nails on a chalkboard to me. And so then I was yelling back at them. And I very much realized that was not the parent I wanted to be. But logically, in my mind, I was like, well, I'm a counselor. I know how to attend to this. I know how to deal with this. This is easy to figure out. And yet
Yeah.
it's not.
That reminds me of when they say the counselor, the therapist needs a therapist, you know,
Yes.
most
Yes.
that's true.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, again, was one of those kind of big moments for me to realize that we all need help. We all need our village, and we don't have to do it alone. But for my kids, they each reacted to grief differently. And I think, again, one thing that I think is important for parents to understand is that kids pop in and out of their grief. Adults tend to stay in their grief. We kind of get stuck in the sadness or the anger and these mixed emotions where it's hard for us to get out of bed. But for our kids, they're more flexible. They're more adaptable. They pop in and out of it. So something will come up and they'll have tears and they'll want to talk about grief. And then they'll go back to playing. And that's healthy. It's not that there's something wrong with your child. And I think for a lot of parents, there's that misunderstanding. Well, my child didn't cry when I told them, or my child didn't continue to cry for weeks, like they just cried once and that was it. But kids process emotions so differently than adults. And the other part is, going back to like when I was talking about my 2.5-year-old, most kids don't understand the permanency of death. They don't understand that this means they're not coming back. And so when you tell them that their loved one has died, they're not thinking about, oh, that means they're not going to attend my high school graduation. They're not going to attend my wedding. You know, all those monumental things. As a parent, that's immediately where our minds go. But as kids, they're not thinking about all of those big events. Now, sometimes our teenagers do, but most of the time, our younger ones, even up through age 12, 13, that's not top of mind for them. And so with kids popping in and out of grief, what I noticed and witnessed about my own kids is all four of them were expressing and talking about things differently. And as my youngest got older, she very much is one who keeps everything inside. And I created the Grief Storm quiz, which helps parents identify what type of griever their child is. And my child is what you would call a blizzard grief type. And the blizzard grief means on the outside, they look fine. They look like everything is okay. When you ask them, they're going to tell you they're fine. But on the inside, they're having that major snowstorm, that heaviness. They're holding their feelings on the inside. They're not sharing with you. And they're not sharing with you, not because they don't want to, but because they don't know how. They don't want to upset you. They don't want to make mom cry. They don't want to upset dad. And so they just choose to keep it in because that feels safer. That feels better. And I think for a lot of times, parents kind of misunderstand and are waiting for the child to initiate grief conversations. And because of that, especially the blizzard types, they're just sitting and waiting for mom or dad to initiate the conversation, to say, you know, it seems like mom might be on your mind today, or it seems like you're missing mom a lot. They're waiting for you to ask those questions. But as a parent, sometimes we're taking our cues from our kids. And so we're looking at the outside saying, oh, they look fine. And when I asked them, they said they're fine. And so then their child just sits with that heaviness and almost sits with it alone. Rain shower grief type is a very common type. My oldest child is a rain shower grief. And she is one who, she has emotions. The feelings come up. We like to say that her emotions come through her eyes. So whether she's sad, happy, mad, she's going to cry. That's where her emotions are going to come from. But as a rain shower grief type, she's willing to talk about her emotions. She knows what her emotions are. She's going to name them. But unfortunately, where I notice some trouble in parenting with rain shower grief kids is if you're a parent who is not comfortable with the emotions, who's maybe not comfortable with the tears, you may have a rain shower grief child, and that's great. But if you're not comfortable with having those conversations, suddenly the child is getting the message, I'm doing something wrong, or I shouldn't be talking about this. And again, I think this is kind of one of those key points where kids are different from adults. Kids are egocentric in their beliefs. They believe that the world revolves around them. And they believe that the things that they do or say affect the outside world, even though lots of times it doesn't. But if we're not putting words to it, they're going to make their own assumptions. So a common example I see in grief and death is that a child might say, I didn't get to say goodbye to my loved one, and now they're mad at me. That's why they died. Or they might say something like, I should have told him that he should get the extra treatment, or I should have told him I loved him more, and because I didn't, he died or she died. Again, in our logical adult brain, that doesn't make any sense. But in a kid brain, because of that egocentric thinking, they do believe that they caused this. It's their fault. And so, as a parent, this is one of the number one places where we can step in and say the words. You know, you did nothing wrong. This wasn't your fault. Again, like with my 2.5-year-old, it may have sounded harsh when I said he died, his heart stopped. Like, I made it very clear there wasn't anything she could have done differently. It was his body stopped working. And I think that's what our kids need to hear, especially our younger ones who they're listening to conversations. They're listening to what we're not saying. And so if we're not putting it out there, they don't know. And so they make up their own meanings, their own associations.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. This is really like in depth, because there was one part you said when you talked about your 2.5 year old, and I remembered my last child. He was a year and a few months old when the dad passed. And then we thought he understood everything. So he will ask you, what? Where's dad? You say, your dad is dead.
Yeah.
Where is dad? Your dad is in heaven. Okay. He will even tell you,
Mm-hmm.
So sometime, was it 2 months ago? One day I just came back and I was just in, and he came to me, he was like, Mom, my dad died. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my God. Did you, Mom, my dad just died. I'm like, really? Your dad died? Well, your dad died a long time ago, like 3 years ago. It was kind
Mm-hmm.
of hilarious, but I could really feel that was the moment he started understanding.
Yeah.
And he's
But
like, yeah,
and so much of that, again, the parents don't always know or understand because we don't do a good job of talking about it out there in the world, is that when our kids are younger, like yours being 1.5 and mine being 2.5, when they get to different developmental age shifts, they reprocess things that have happened in their life. Of course, grief is something they're going to reprocess. So he's going to reprocess that at age 4. He's going to reprocess that around age 8. He's going to reprocess that in his preteens. And then he's going to reprocess it again in his teens and in adulthood. That's what we all do because we try to understand through our new learning what we now know about the world at this new age. Okay, what does this mean? And so, yeah, most likely that's exactly what just happened for him, is that he had
yeah.
kind of that new processing and awareness of, oh, this is what
Oh, this is what, yeah. And he just came back and he's like, my dad died.
mm-hmm.
No, my dad died. I'm like, my dad is dead. Died 3 years ago.
And
You
again,
know?
if you're not prepared for those conversations, I mean,
Oh,
our initial instinct is to look at them and be like, of
mm,
course,
of
of course
course,
he,
yeah.
what's wrong with you? But that's really where, again, if we had some knowledge to understand how kids process, then we could take them aside and say, you're right, he did. And, let's talk about this. Let's go back and kind of talk about what happened, because he's going to hear it different now
Yeah.
than he did when he was a toddler.
Because that
Yeah.
was what I did. Though I had to bring him out, even the brothers, and we had to explain to him again what the process of dying. Okay,
Yeah.
your dad is late, he's dead, he died from cancer, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. We explained he's in heaven, he's watching over you. We spoke
Yep.
all the English we could. And he was like, oh, really? Okay. So
Yeah.
that's one stage. So definitely it's going to reprocess it, like you said, because I have like four and they were different ages. And
Mhm.
every time, at every season, I think they reprocess these things differently.
Yeah.
So every time another stage, when they get to another stage, another season, then they reprocess it again differently. When they
Yeah.
get to that milestone, they reprocess it differently. So I think parents need to understand that with their kids, and it also affects their emotional stuff and state of mind. I don't know how you can explain that basically to parents and also to the kids, because some children are listening. I told my son, I said, you guys go listen and give to your friends too. Let them listen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think the biggest thing to understand with emotions is I think emotions get a bad rap because we kind of think like, oh, if I have them, there's something wrong with me, or I'm supposed to do something specific with them. And really, having our emotions just means feel that emotion for 30 to 90 seconds, feel it in your body, feel where it's showing up, and then take a couple big deep breaths and release it, let it go. And I think it's such a simple thing, and that's why we don't do it. we try
yes.
we try to overcomplicate it and make it seem like it needs to be this bigger thing. And one of the things I like to talk about with emotions, that I had mentioned earlier to you, is about the cows and the buffaloes. And I think it's such an important way to just visualize emotions, is that when we think of emotions as a storm, which again is how I created those grief storms. So the grief storms are going to pop up, which are going to be full of emotions. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's sadness, sometimes it's a mixture of more than one emotion. And of course, our brain likes it when it's just one or the other. But the reality is, sometimes there are those moments where it's happy and sad, or, it's a happy mad. There's a combination. But what happens with the cows is that this storm pops up, and the cows see the storm, and the cows run away from the storm. And when they run away from the storm, eventually that storm still catches up with them. And so what that means is the cow is actually in the storm for much longer.
Yeah, that's
And so
true.
instead of having those emotions and feeling them for 60 to 90 seconds, it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be hours, but they're avoiding the storm, but the storm still comes.
Hmm.
And so the other way to look at it is to follow the buffalo. And what the buffalo do is the storm pops up, those emotions come over the hill, and the buffalo see the storm, and instead of running away from it, they run towards the storm. And when they run towards the storm, they're actually in the storm for less time. And that helps us know it's only temporary. The grief storms, when they pop up in our kids, they're just temporary. Yes, there's going to be another one that comes, but it's feeling those feelings in your body and then releasing them. You, as the parent, being an anchor for your kid while they're in this storm, and letting those feelings move through. So, again, being like the buffalo, let's get into that storm as fast as we can so that we don't let it just sit there and linger, because, like we already talked about, grief will wait for you. So, if you don't address it in childhood, it's going to follow your kids into adulthood. And most likely, it's going to pop up in more unhealthy ways, more of a traumatizing way. It's going to affect their relationships. It's going to affect their job performance. I've seen plenty of people that think that their grief was handled because they're successful, productive humans. And then once we start getting into conversations, they realize, wow, my stress or my need to believe that I have to perform started with my grief. Yes, I channeled it into this positive thing, but I didn't ever address the sadness. And I think, again, for parents, like, we need to realize that for a lot of kids, anger is part of this. And a lot of our parents get scared of their kids' anger. They don't know what to do with it. They can deal with the tears, but they don't know what to do with their child who is just so angry that dad died or angry that grandma died. And they don't know how to handle that or how to channel that.
Wow. This is really key. It's intriguing, right? Because it's like an eye opener. And someone sent a message and he said, well, okay, I typed it. Let me see if I can bring it up. He said, what do you do when you try to initiate the conversation and the child is not ready to open up or flex up?
So that is such a great question, um, because absolutely that can be a typical response, especially if you're talking about teenagers. But even when you're talking about younger ones, if they don't want to talk about it, um, probably my two go-to tips in this is, I think as adults we kind of believe I need to sit in this chair and my child needs to sit across from me and we need to have this conversation exchange. And for a lot of our kids, that just becomes too much. It feels like an interrogation. It feels like pressure to say the right thing. And so I've found that with kids, sometimes those walk and talks. So we're out in nature, we're just walking, and we let the conversation come up there. Sometimes kids are more apt to talk about it because they're walking next to you. They're not actually looking at you. And so sometimes that can help them talk. It also, just by being in nature, helps calm the energy. It helps calm the emotions. So it's kind of a natural medicine just by being out in nature, out in sun. The other helpful thing that I find is car talks. So if you are driving from one place to another, your kids know that you're only going to be in the car with them for 15 minutes. They know you're going to face out the window because you're driving. You're paying attention to the road, hopefully. And you can start to have a conversation because they can look out the window. They don't have to look at you. And they're going to be more apt to talk with you. Those are two big ones. The other thing is sometimes kids don't have the words. And so they're actually resisting, not because they're not ready, but because they don't know what to say. And so their flare up or their emotional reaction is more about they don't have the words and they don't feel good about themselves because they don't have the words. So it may be helpful if you explain how you're feeling. So sharing, this is a hard conversation to have. This is hard to talk about dad no longer being here. Or my favorite, very therapeutic term is to say, this sucks. I feel like it's very multi-purpose. And it's true. It does suck. It sucks that we have to talk about that mom died or dad died. It's not fair. But we're still here and we're going to talk about it. And again, I think letting kids know the importance of talking about it. That if we keep it all inside our mind, it actually builds and it feels worse. It feels stronger. It feels heavier. And so definitely to the parent who wrote this question, keep trying. And don't look for the 30-minute conversations. Look for the 2-minute conversations. Just start with the short little conversations and it will build.
Hmm. Okay, I have another question here from, I think this is from a child. It's anonymous though. It's an anonymous message that was sent to me, and but the content shows like it's from a child. They say, "How do I make my mom know that we are all grieving and she should not bug me with hers? It has made me more keep more to myself and make wrong choices, finding solace in things like sex, vaping, etc."
And I would be curious about, if mom's making him feel like it's all about her grief and not the family's grief. And I think sometimes moms are doing the best that we can, and sometimes, truthfully, it's all the time. Moms are doing the best that we can, and sometimes we don't have the tools, and sometimes we're still learning, and especially when we're talking about grief, we didn't expect this. And so it's not that we read a handbook and we're prepared and ready. And I would imagine if you shared with your mom your feelings, that it feels like sometimes she makes it about her and not about everybody's grief. She may have a hard time hearing it at first, but as a mom, she wants to hear that. She does want to do better. She just doesn't know how because she's in a place that she's never been before. And so she's struggling too. The other thing is, I am a big fan of we need a village. So maybe if mom's struggling, maybe there's an aunt or a grandma or an uncle or a neighbor who could be that safe person that you talk to and that you go to about your grief. If you know that mom is not handling her grief the way that you would like, maybe some conversations from an adult perspective could happen. And the other thing is, I applaud you for recognizing that you're not maybe making the best choices for where you're at and your age. And to me, this is one of those ways that sex, vaping, it's a tool. You're trying to make yourself feel better. And in grief, it feels like that's the thing that might help. And I think by you identifying them as wrong choices, you don't like how you feel about them. But that's all the more reason we need to find you a safe place to be able to talk about your feelings, talk about the grief that you are having that you feel like maybe is going unnoticed in your house. I hope you can find that person.
I hope so. Because she sent it as an anonymous, and I don't know. So I'll just try. I'll try. I hope I know the person should be listening. So if you're listening, you can send an email, okay, and we'll be able to reach out to you. And we promise you it's going to be in a safe place.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have this other one. It says, "Can you talk to me about grief from identity and bullying?"
Grief from identity and bullying. Um, so I'm not quite sure I understand what the question is, but if you're talking more from what I see with a lot of kids that I work with, is they kind of get singled out once they have a parent has died or a grandparent who maybe was the caretaker has died. kids can be pretty cruel, and they're the first ones to point out when it's Mother's Day and everybody's making a Mother's Day project and you don't have a mom who's alive to give that present to. I see that quite often. And that's one of those things where I like to work with parents about empowering their kids on what to say. Practicing role playing is big. So really practicing what would you say to somebody who is making fun of you for your mom dying or dad dying. I see it a lot in times where maybe the parent or grandparent died by suicide or an overdose. Those ways where people have opinions or judgments on whether that was an acceptable way to die. And I think the number one thing, like, it is completely okay for you to say, I don't want to talk about this, or that's none of your business. You know, like I mentioned, your village is your safe place, your safe people. And not everybody belongs in your village. And it's okay for you to say no or set boundaries. And if you're having a hard time getting those words out, the visual of just putting your hand up, you know, that old talk to the hand and walking away, like, that is okay.
Yeah.
It's not your job to have to educate them or defend the
What?
person that you love. It's okay for you to say, I don't want to talk about this, or I'm not going to talk about it with you. And that includes sometimes adults. Sometimes adults pry in kids' worlds and want to ask. And now, obviously, parents, they want to help, so they want to talk. But what I'm talking about is maybe a teacher or a friend's parent who maybe doesn't need to know the whole story. It's okay for you to say, I don't want to talk about this, or I don't feel like sharing. So I hope that answered the question. If not, send another follow-up question. We'll answer.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh
Yeah.
my God, this is so inspiring. And I think a lot of people are really learning from it and they are really interested in what we're doing here right now. And I'm so happy to have you here. And but I think we have one question
Okay.
that, yeah. So, he said many grieving children have returned to school, which can be overwhelming. How can parents, educators, and counselors work together to support a grieving child in a school environment?
Yeah. So I actually have, if you join my Facebook group or it's on my main page, a little sheet. It's called Handle with Care. And I share a document out there that parents can share with the schools or with counselors, teachers, friends, that says, essentially, we've had a bad day and we just need to be handled with a little extra love and care today. And so that's a note that could go to the school or it could come home from the school, because there are going to be things that come up through the day, like the bullying. Teachers do the best that they can to control those things, but kids are out on the playground or in the lunchroom and not every conversation gets heard. And so I think there needs to be communication between the school. I think a lot of parents want to keep the loss to themselves and they don't always let the teachers know. And so the teachers don't even know how to support or don't know that the child just lost somebody significant. And So they're, of course, on them about their homework, not realizing that their whole world has just been flipped upside down. I've worked with several families who they did not want the school to know their business. They didn't want them to know anything. But because of that, that meant the school counselor couldn't check in on the little girl. That meant the teachers couldn't say something to the classroom about your friend just lost her dad. Let's be supportive, let's be kind. It's hard when we lose a parent. Again, just that grief literacy, that's such a great opportunity to help our child have a supportive community, because they're at school for 8 hours a day. That's a long time. And to be supported in love versus supported or be surrounded by people who are bullying or making fun of them or laughing at them when they have tears, or something is read in a book that makes them think about mom or think about dad. It's so hard. And so I think, again, number one, that communication is key. Really being open. Again, school doesn't have to know all the details, but at least knowing what's happening at home so they can support you. And I think the other part is that teachers do see things. And so if teachers or the counselor can let the parents know, so that they know, oh, my child is struggling more than I thought, because they seem to find at home, again, maybe it's a blizzard type, they seem fine at home, they're holding it in, but they have a best friend at school, and so at school they're sharing their emotions more. That, again, just one example. I think it's that communication is key. I do have a Facebook group where I offer lots of support and sharing these kind of resources. It's the Growing Up with Grief Facebook group. And I have educators in there who take the information and then share it with parents or teachers. And I've also started going out to school districts and speaking about grief, because I do think it is, again, we're grief illiterate. We're just not talking about it. And although today we're talking about death loss, there are so many types of grief. And our kids encounter grief in so many different ways all of the time.
Wow, thank you so much. So how can people reach you? Apart from your Facebook group, your website, I'm just read all up right now so you can check it out. The website of the Grief Storm, please, and also the Facebook group. So you can check it out. And but can you let them know how you picture?
I didn't hear what the last part, you were breaking up.
Okay, I said, can you let them know how people can reach you?
Oh, yes. So you can reach out to me through my website. There's a little link where you can sign up for a free 15-minute consult, and we can talk about the things that I offer. Or you're welcome to send me an email, which is Annette@AnnetteAthy.com. And for those of you who do have child grievers, the Grief Storm quiz is an excellent way to start and identify what type of griever your child is. And in those emails that you'll receive, I give tips on, if your child is this type of storm, here's how you would talk about things, or here's how you would approach them, or here's how they're showing up in their grief. And it's a real simple, only 7 questions, real quick quiz. And then, like I said, in the Facebook group, you are more than welcome to join or send me a direct message from there.
So what's the name of the Facebook group?
The Facebook group is Growing Up with Grief.
Growing Up with Grief. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you. I appreciate you. I love all that you've done and love what you're doing in the community. So I know that God is going to continue to guide you through this journey in Jesus' name. So, just like every other one, children grieve and grieve very well. So, contrary to the regular belief that kids don't grieve, now you hear from the expert. Kids really grieve, they grieve very well. So, thank you for joining us, and but I'm not going to leave without giving us a unique quote for today, and that is coming from Matthew 5 verse 4, and it says, "Blessed are those who will be comforted." And also, I have a Greek quote which says, "Grief is just love with no place to go." Yes, grief is just love with no place to go. So we just keep loving, but there's no place to go, so we keep loving. Okay. Thank you so much. So, how has grief really shaped your relationship with your loved ones? So you can share your thoughts with us on grief to now at gmail.com. Thank you. You can reach out to us at Grief to Grace on all platforms. Don't forget to like, share, and follow us on all of our social media platforms. And also share this link with all of your friends and family, with your kids, because sometimes what they know, we don't even know. We do not teach child that is really great. So you just need to share it with them as much as you can. Let them listen to it, and I'm sure they're going to definitely learn something from it. And you can reach out to Etty on her contacts and join the Facebook group. And I tell you, when you do that, you'll be able to have direct access, and you'll be able to have a safe place for yourself and for your family. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And I am super grateful, and I love how much you share so sincerely. So may the good Lord continue to be with you and be with every one of our community in Jesus' name. Thank you for bringing us. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for proud. Grateful, grateful. This is which people that are giving to us, and we are here with you nowhere. Thank you. I love you. Bye.
Thank you so very much.